All right. How many of you have found yourself in the last few weeks in a conversation about politics? Let me see here. Oh my goodness. How many of you enjoyed your conversation about politics? Nah, Greg says maybe a little bit. Nobody else raised their hand. Right. Sometimes when we get into political, morning Jeff, morning Caroline. Sometimes when we get into political discussions, things get a little touchy, don't they? We have our opinions, we have our way of thinking, we have our philosophies, we have our convictions, and if we're not careful, things can pick up pretty quickly. And we've been in those, we've had those, and sometimes they can be fun, sometimes they're not. Now, as we look at the political scene that's transpiring now and we see what's going on, I can honestly say there's no surprises, I don't think. We know what each candidate is promoting. We know what they're saying. We might even be able to write some commercials or speeches for them, maybe better than their speechwriters are doing right now. We are talking about immigration. We are talking about taxes. Obviously, we're talking about the economy. And so we're hearing those things over and over. We're not hearing anything new. We're just hearing what we anticipate to hear. And unless something drastic happens in the next couple of weeks, we're just going to continue with that until the vote, and then we'll see what happens. But sometimes we are in situations where we hear things, we're like, man, what did they actually mean when they said that? Or what's behind the scenes? And that's when the analysts come in and they try to tackle what's going on behind the scenes and what was really said. Now, as we go back to Luke chapter 6, we've got a speech coming from whom the majority of these people think is going to be the next political leader. Okay, they're hearing commands coming from the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and they're excited and anticipating, okay, what this new leader has to say, what this new charismatic teacher has to say. I mean, after all, he's turned water to wine, he's healed the lame, he's changed lives. This has got to be something for us that we can glean from, that we really want to take with us. But what Jesus is about to say is going to be very difficult for them to process and very difficult for them to understand. It was like one summer we got some guys together from our high school to play in a basketball league. Well, back in my day, AAU really wasn't a thing, so we put a team together to play in the summer in an adult men's basketball league. And so here's these high school guys, and we're playing all these men, these adults. And it was quite exciting. One team we played, they all had their names on the back, but it was like the Gladiators, Rock, Iceberg. And we ended up with those guys, and we didn't know if we'd come out alive or not. Well, there was like a minute left, and we were winning. And the guy that was coaching us, he was a character anyway, he called a timeout. And we were only up by a couple points. And he said, all right, boys, we've got to make a decision. And we're all looking at him like, okay. And he's like, do you want to play to win, or do you want to keep from losing? Now, we're looking at 17 and 18-year-olds, and we had no idea what he was even saying. We're like, we want to play to win. He's like, all right, let's go out and do it. And we lost. We should have played to keep from losing. And at the time, we had no idea what he was saying. But now looking back, yeah, I get it now. We should have stalled, passed the ball around, and kept from losing. What Jesus is getting ready to speak, and he's getting ready to say some things that at the moment, I'm not sure anyone understood. But years later, they're going to look back and say, now I understand what he was saying. There's going to be others who are going to hear this, and in like a conversation with politics, they're going to get mad and walk off and never come back. And so up to this point, what has Jesus been doing? He's been talking about the Beatitudes and blessed, and we like that, right? Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. And then as we looked at last week, Luke gives us a little different angle of the Beatitudes, where we see Jesus' sermon here's a little different in the plain as opposed to the Sermon on the Mount, because he says, woe. And we looked at those woes, right, last week. In verse 24, woe to you that are rich. Woe to you who are full. Woe to you who laugh now. Woe to you when all men. And so we've seen the woes. Okay, and so Jesus gives the blessing, the encouragement, then he gives the woes. And now here, he has another conjunction. And I've circled this in my Bible because when he starts the woe, he does what? Verse 24, but woe. So now Jesus gives us that conjunction again, but. Okay, and they're thinking, okay, now what? And he says in verse 27, but I say unto you which hear. Now, in a large crowd, there's going to be those who are listening and those who are daydreaming, right? I don't think the crowd was checking their emails or the scores of the sports or putting their fantasy football teams together while Jesus was speaking like they might in my sermons. But there were those who were listening and those who were not. And he says, but I say unto you which hear, you who are listening, you who are taking this in, love your enemies. Do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smiteth you on the cheek, offer the other one also. And him that taketh away your cloak, let him have your coat too. Give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as you would that men should do to you, do also to them likewise. For if you love them which love you, what thank of ye? For sinners also love those that love them. And if you do good to them which do good to you, what thank of ye? For sinners also do even the same. And if you lend to them who have no hope to receive, some of you know what that's like, especially if you have kids. What thank of ye? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, hoping that not for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and you shall be the children of the highest. For he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Be therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. So they're hearing this. They're listening to this. And what Jesus has said right here, as he begins to say it, he knows this is not going to go over well. He knows this is going to cause friction. He knows this is going to be an issue. And that's why he starts it off. Now that you are listening, I really want you to get this. If you get nothing out of this sermon, get this. Well, out of everything you could have gotten out of this sermon on the plane up to this point, this is what you would want to forget. So what's the big deal? What is going on? Well, the rivalry and the animosity between the Jews and the Romans was great. Very deep. We're talking about utter hatred for each other. We might dress up, and kids might dress up with their soldier outfits on, and you can go to the Christian bookstore and buy your Roman soldier outfit. If you would have done that in Bible times, a Jew would have probably done some nasty things to your home. And most Jewish parents would have never stood for that because they hated the Romans. The Romans abused their authority. They took advantage of their power. They usurped that authority over the Jews. The Jews really didn't have any weapons in comparison or armor in comparison to the Romans, so they could just kind of do what they wanted to do, and they had their free-for-all on these Jews. The Romans were an enemy, a hated enemy. And now we have a king. Now we have someone that's coming, and now for the first time in history, there might be somebody that's going to be able to lead us out of the captivity of these Romans. There might be somebody who's going to come and set us free. We might honestly have a politician here that's going to be different than all the others and really do something good for us. And so not just the disciples really, but all these others that are listening, You know, their hope and their sole purpose of being part of this Jesus regime was that he would lead them to conquer the Romans in a final conquest. It had happened before, okay, back when Alexander the Great came into Jewish land and the Greeks were taking the Jews and making them offer sacrifices, and Daniel talks about that in the book of Daniel, that this is going to happen. And so Antiochus Epiphanes is making these Jews worship false idols, offer sacrifices before false idols. And as this is transpiring, and as one of the soldiers is making one of the men offer a sacrifice in front of a false god, they revolt. And he kills the Roman soldier. He gets an army behind him. It's the Maccabean revolt. And his name was Simon of Maccabees. And so Simon of Maccabees puts this band of men together, and they revolt against the Greeks. And Alexander the Great didn't think it was that big of a deal, so he put some guys together and said, go take them out, and the Jews won. And so they put a dream team of soldiers together and said, go wipe these Jews out, and the Jews win. And they claim their independence, and they claim their freedom to at least worship the way they want to worship. But now Rome has moved in. Rome isn't necessarily against the Jewish people, because back in the Battle of Egypt, Julius Caesar was fighting, and some Jews got together and helped him win. So he wanted to look favorably upon the Jewish people, so he put some of the Jews in leadership. And we know that from the high priest and the coming and the killing of Christ. We know how that all portrays and comes out. And so now, as the Romans are there, you have the hierarchy. You have the Sadducees and them who are in, okay, with the Romans. We talked about Matthew, Levi, the tax collector. You know, he had turned his back on the Jewish people and kind of joined with the Romans. So he was treated well, had money coming in, and was working on behalf of the Romans. But then you had the other class who hated all of that. They hated the Romans. They hated what the Romans were doing. They hated the leadership that they believed were traitors. Okay, and these guys were putting together little bands to take out these Romans, and there were riots all the time. I don't think I would call them terrorists, but assassins. Okay, Robin Hoods, vigilantes. And so they were getting these groups, and they were taking out Romans, and they were even against their own Jewish brothers. And they would go in, and some of these Jews would be wealthy, and they would have other Jews working for them as slaves, and they'd break into their homes and set the slaves free, and then they would join that revolt, and this was all going on. So there's turmoil, if you will, to say the least, in Israel. And it's brother against brother, and it's fighting, and all this is happening, and the Romans are tired of it, and every time somebody steps up to take a lead, like Simon of Maccabees, they just throw him on the cross and kill him, which we know what will lead to in a couple years and at the end of the book of Luke. So that's what's transpiring. And so now we have Jesus. And Jesus steps up, and no one knows what to do with him because he's different. And he's doing things differently. And again, they think, hey, our Savior is here. The next rebel leader is here. One even greater than Simon the Hammer is here, and we are going to be set free. And so Jesus sits them all down. He's given them this sermon. They think this is their first political talk that they are going to hear. And now this next rebel leader was looking at them, and he tells them what in verse 27? Love your enemies. He looks at them and he says, love the Romans. Love the Herodians. The Herodians, they're named after Herod. Yeah, love them. And they are thinking, are you for real? That's not even possible. How can this be? And then Jesus doesn't stop there. Jesus goes into the first 4 commands that we are going to find in the book of Luke. And they're waiting for these commands to be like, follow me, grab your sword, let's take out the Romans. And look at these commands. Love your enemy. Do good to those that hate you. Bless them which curse you, and pray for them. And these first 4 commands are not the commands that they wanted to see. I mean, this is radical commandments from Jesus. And the reason that they're so different and so radical is because you're not going to find this in the Old Testament. It's not there. So there's no prophet that has come out that says, hey, you need to love Nebuchadnezzar. You need to love the Babylonians. You need to love the Medes and the Persians. It's not there. So Jesus is introducing something that's completely new. This teaching is on a subject in a class all by itself. They've not heard anything like this before. And so these people are living in an occupied territory in their land, wanting to follow their rules. And the Romans have opposed them. The Romans have hurt them. The Romans hate them. And this nationalistic teaching that Jesus is offering is borderline immoral to a lot of those who are hearing. And they can't believe what they're hearing. And the way Jesus says it, though, this is not a suggestion. Okay, this is a command. And not only is it a command, it's like, it's one thing to get a command. All right, if you, I don't know, your boss tells you to do something and you really don't want to do it, okay, but you do it. The boss says, I don't want you to seal the envelopes with water. I want you to lick the envelopes, all right? You're like, okay, I'll lick these 4 envelopes and I'll be done. But then the boss says, hey, look, that went pretty well. I want you to do that every time we send out a mailing. I want you to lick the envelopes. Now, that's different. I can handle it one time, but to do this every single day, I don't think so. That's the verbiage that Jesus is using here. So when he says to love, to do, to bless, and to pray, he uses it in the tense in the original that means I want you to continually do this. Right? The tense connotes continual action. So, all right, I'll love them today, Jesus, but tomorrow it's back on. You're going to continue to love them. You are going to continue to pray for them. You are going to continue to do good for them, and you are going to continue to bless them. Now, when we think about love, we have made love an emotion, right? And shake your head with me, yes or no, or is love an emotion? It can be, okay? But is true love an emotion? It's not. Because, somebody say, well, I don't love them anymore, or we've lost the spark, or, our relationship isn't what it was when it first started. And what we're doing is we're basing that relationship as a couple on an emotion, but love is not an emotion. Love is an act of the will. And so Jesus did not command these people to feel a certain way about the Romans. Jesus is commanding these people to will to the fact that I am going to love them. Emotions cannot be commanded, but the will can. Thus, the command to love one's enemies is not directed on how they feel, but how they act. How many, we won't raise our hands because if we took a couple minutes, we could all probably think of somebody that just drives us absolutely crazy. If there's siblings in here, it'd be really easy for them to tell us who. And there's people in our lives that we cannot stand. Okay, maybe not to the hatred and the putrid that we have towards the Romans, like the Jews had towards the Romans, but there's people that just truly annoy us. There's people in the workplace that if I don't have to go upstairs and see her, I'm going to do everything I can not to. There's neighbors that if we see them outside, we don't go out our front door, we go out the back door. Oh, that hit home. Some of you are smiling right now because you can think of that neighbor. Maybe it's an in-law or an outlaw, a family member that just rubs us the wrong way. And they know how to rub us the wrong way. And Jesus says to do what? To love them. To love them. The heart of this sermon that Jesus preaches, if you look, you could take, I would encourage you, just kind of circle love as you go down through there. Okay, because Jesus, he emphasizes it twice. Well, obviously we have the golden rule in 31, but he says, I want you to love in 27. Then in 32, he says, love again. And so this emphasis of love is there. So we see that Jesus wants us to love. The heart of the sermon is love. Jesus is stressing his followers that they must love the unlovely and those who do not appeal unto them. And a lot of times that's what it is, right? It's not so much a hatred, but it's just, man, we don't see things eye to eye. We don't get along. And Jesus says, I want you to love them. And okay, I'll love them. Yeah, I love them. I do not like them at all, but I love them. What about doing good for them? Sending a card, anonymous card in the mail with a little gift card? I don't think so, right? To be a blessing to them? What about praying for them? You know, that person that drives me crazy, I can deal with them. Why? Because I'll block them out of my mind. I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to see them. I don't want to think about them. Okay, I'm just going to block them out of my mind. And now Jesus says, no, you can't do that either, because I want you to what? I want you to continually pray for them. I don't want them on my prayer list. I don't want them anywhere near me. And how do you pray for them? I'm going to pray like David did. God, smite them. No. Okay? That again, that's back, just a few chapters. You're not in the Old Testament anymore, people. We're following the teachings of Jesus. We got to love them. God, just help them come to you. When's the last time we prayed a prayer for someone that we could not stand? Now, going to the language of the day, again, with this emphasis on love, what Jesus was asking them to do, again, was unique. Because we had different types of love in the Bible. It's no different than the English language. We have different, or whatever, pale. We could come up with a bunch of them. Well, love was that way. But charity or love in our Bibles, the Greeks had actually 4 different words for love. And each one had a different meaning. And of course, if you think about the culture of the Greek culture, there was some nasty stuff going on when it came to that. So there was a storge love, which was a love of natural affection. Okay, so that would be the love that we naturally have for children, the love that we have for our grandparents, just that natural love. And then there was an eros, which we would know erotic. Okay, so that was a romantic, love that pushed many of the sculptors and the artists of the day in Greece in the poems that we would find of that time. Then there was a phileo love, where we get Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, which meant a brotherly love, and that's a friendship. And, when Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, God, you know that I love you. That's the word Peter uses here. God, I phileo. I have a brotherly love for you. And we criticize Peter for that, but I'm not ready to criticize him for that, because the word agapē that we know today was not necessarily used a lot in this time period. Okay? It means a love for the unlovely. And so when would you use that? Well, in the culture of the day, not much. Maybe if, we talk about our kids, they all have different type of hearts. And so you're going and you're going to get a puppy. And you go and you have this litter of puppies. And all these puppies are jumping and having fun, but there's this one in the back that It's not as cute as the other puppies. It kind of has a limp, and it doesn't get up and run around as much. And you think, oh, look at that cute little puppy. That's the one I'm going to take. Okay, that would be at the time an agapē love, a love for that unlovely. So it was only used in that time period. And when Jesus comes, Jesus takes this word agapē and uses it in such a way that the Christians claim this word. Those of the way claim this word. Now it's not only becomes a love for the unlovely, but God uses this in such a way that it's to sacrificially love. Okay, a giving of one's life to love. That's not originally how it was used, but that's how it develops. We've seen the same thing, and today one crude example would be, the word gay. And if you watch the Flintstones, we'd have a gay old time. And we know that society and culture and time has changed the meaning of that word to what it means today, and that's what is going on with agapē. So when Peter says, I phileo you, in his mind, until he comes to concepts of what agapē really, really is, that's a pretty strong word for him to use. And that's what Jesus is saying here. I want you to agapē. So years later, when they look back and Jesus says, love our enemies, this is an agapē type love. So our Lord then begins to explain where this agapē type love is to be used. And he says, the object of this agapē type love is your enemies. The manner of this agapē type love is going to be self-sacrificing and self-denying. And Jesus says, I want you to give up and endure much for the sake of showing kindness to your enemies and avoiding strife. Where's the balance? Okay, we get it. We understand it. But where's the balance with this person that just drives me crazy? Where's the balance with me giving back what they're giving to me? Where's the balance of letting it just roll off my back and giving them what they deserve? It's difficult. It's difficult. And I'm going through 1 Peter on Wednesday nights, and in 1 Peter chapter 2, Peter says, I want you to follow in his steps. And then he gives a list of things where Jesus was threatened and threatened not, and Jesus was reviled and he reviled not. He answered not again. And so we were talking about, okay, how do we relate to that? Peter pulled out his sword and cut off an ear, right? And so there was a defense that was there, and Jesus says, Peter, not now. But there's two examples in the scriptures that I think in the time that we have would be just unique to look at, to get a glimpse or an idea. Let's go to Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7. Again, a writing of Luke. And in Acts chapter 7, verse 54. And when they heard these things, they were cut to the heart. Okay, and they were gnashing at him with their teeth. I mean, they're just screaming and yelling and blurting out and really going against Stephen. And then Stephen cries out in verse 56, look, I see the heavens, they're open. And Jesus is standing at the right hand of God. Oh, now that really did it. And so now they really cry out. They drag him outside of the city and they stone him. And he says in verse 59, he cries out, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Do not hold this to their account. And he fell asleep. We don't see Stephen kicking. We don't see Stephen screaming. We don't see Stephen trying to run away from this mob. We see him going, kneeling down, and offering himself as a martyr for Christ. Go over a couple chapters to 16 with me. Acts chapter 16. Okay, Acts chapter 16, we know what transpires. Okay, Peter and Silas are thrown into prison. The prison doors shake. The doors are open. The keeper of the prison wakes up out of sleep. He sees the doors are open. He drew out his sword and he was going to kill himself. And what does Paul yell in verse 28? Stop. We're all here. Look, you've been beaten. You have a death sentence on your head. There's an earthquake and the door's open. Are you sticking around? I'm not sticking around. But Paul sticks around. And we know what God does with that. What's going on here? They love their enemies. I'm going to let that jailer go ahead and kill himself, and then I'm going to take the sword and I'm going to run. But not Paul. You know, Sam John from India will tell you that Christians in India, in the northern part, I'm talking the Jaipur area, they all have their homes in a database with the Hindus. All the Christians' homes are marked. Why? Because the Hindus and the Muslims every now and then will strike up a war. And the Hindus know that the Muslims fight back. And it's a bloodbath. So in order to show dominance and in order to show strength, the next time one of these battles break out between the Hindus and the Muslims, the Hindus are going to attack and burn to the ground all the homes in their database that are Christian, because they know the Christians will not fight back. They know the Christians are not going to raise swords against them. And so they're going to go and they're going to slay that enemy. It's tough. It's hard to see. But Jesus says, love your enemies. Now, it gets worse before it gets better. You can stay here if you want to. You don't have to turn back because we know the passage. Okay, if you get slapped on one cheek, turn the other cheek and get slapped on the other. But here's the thing. In my mind, that's what I've always pictured it. You know, slap on the face, then turn around and get slapped on the other side of the face. This word here for slap, it means a right hook. Okay, this is a shot. So Jesus is saying, if you take a shot to the right side of your face, okay, and you fall down and you stagger and you get back up, I want you to shake it off, align your jaw, say, not bad, try this side. Okay? But not in a smart aleck way, but in a loving way. Man, if I deserved it on this side, go ahead and hit me on this side. To be taken advantage of. And just go ahead and let it happen. Again, that's not natural. If I'm going to take a shot in the face, okay, gloves are coming off. And Jesus says no. If that Roman comes up to you and hits you in the face, you just get up and let him hit you again. When Sam's dad, KC, 60 plus years ago, left southern India and walked to the north, knowing that no gospel message was allowed in the north, he gets to the city of Jaipur and he begins to preach on the streets. And a mob comes around him with crowbars and rocks. And the next thing he knows is he's waking up where somebody, and they have no idea who it was, drug him to a hospital and laid him outside of a hospital. He remembers waking up outside of the hospital, somebody getting him inside the hospital and recovering there from the beating that he took from those Hindus. Now, as a sixth grader, when I heard that, and as a sixth grader coming up in martial arts when I heard that, I'm thinking, how many of those guys could I take on, right? If I take out the guy with the crowbar, and I get the crowbar, but he let them beat him. 60 years later, hundreds and hundreds of students have been trained in a Bible college. Churches have been planted all over the land of India. Orphanages have been started. There's 350 kids going to a Christian school in Jaipur right now. Things that were utterly unheard of because of the love this man had for the people that he went to preach the gospel to. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. And then it gets worse. Because Jesus says not only that, when they take your cloak, let them have your tunic as well. Okay, your tunic is your undergarments. And now Jesus is not saying, look, I want you to walk around naked, but what Jesus is saying is, this is the risk that you're going to take that's going to make you fully exposed. Okay, it could be humiliating. And so Jesus is not arguing that we should be willingly stripped down, okay, and run around naked, but the point has to do with being exposed to be taken advantage of. And Matthew will talk about, hey, and we'll look at this later, if they make you carry their armor, where a Roman could come up to a Jew and say, look, take my armor, and I want you to carry it for a mile down the road. They had to do it. And Jesus says, when you're done with a mile, look at the soldier and say, hey, man, I'm not doing too bad. I'll go another if you want me to. That's what this is referring to. It requires being vulnerable again and again and again and again. Again, my mind goes to missions and being exposed to danger, in having, your home vandalized over and over. I have a buddy in Scotland that married a woman who had been working in the inner city with the inner city people, some rough areas of Scotland. And after they got married, the Lord put it on their hearts to go and to minister. Now, this is a young man, I'm telling you, with the connections and who his father was and grandfather was. He could be preaching all over the world. But instead, they sold their house, moved in inner city, and started a ministry among the inner city people. And he will tell stories of waking up in the middle of the night with huge rocks that had been thrown through their windows with notes on them saying, get out, we don't want you here. Now he's got a church and he's preaching the gospel to these people every Sunday. He was vulnerable, but yet he had a love for these people and he endured that for the cause of Christ. Paul was exposed to danger, and we know that over and over again. But again, where's the line? Where's the line? When is enough enough? I don't know. I'll just be honest. I don't know. I know we had a missionary here a few weeks ago that was going into an African country that's being dominated by ISIS. If he'd have come to me and wanted to be on the mission board that I oversee and said, hey, Treg, I want to be with IFM, how about you guys take me on and I'm going to go into an ISIS-led country, I'd be like, no way. Right? That's crazy. That's a death sentence. And we know with the Apostle Paul, when he was getting ready, tied to the post, he's getting ready to receive more stripes, 39 stripes save one. There was going to be a whole lot more coming. And he says, hey, time out. Hey, before you guys do this, I just want you to know I'm a Roman citizen. And they look at each other and say, well, Houston, we have a problem. If he's a citizen, we can't do this. There were times where persecution was coming and they knew it, and what did they do? They let Paul down by way of a basket. They said, Paul, look, it's not safe for you to go out this way. We're going to put you down by way of a basket, and we're going to send you out this way. And then 16 of verse 40, they come out of the prison and they went to Lydia's house, and they didn't go back into the prison. They took off. They didn't stay there. Right? In verse 10, the brethren did what? They sent Paul and Silas away by night. Okay, so they would be safe. So there's a balance. We have to take care of our own bodies. We have to take care of ourselves, and we encourage others to do so. But there is this idea, okay, and this mentality that we got to know that for the cause of Christ and the calling of Christ, I have got to agapē these people, and it might cost me something. What if somebody came in here and went to arrest me today for preaching the gospel? 8 days with this crazy cold. Am I going to fight that? Am I going to say open fire? I'd still get killed because with all the guns in this church, I wouldn't stand a chance up here. No, I'm going to walk down and go for the cause of Christ. So Jesus says, look, we have the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I'm just going to finish with an example. Let's go back to Acts chapter 7. Man, I don't know, Treg, if I was Stephen, how I would handle this or what I would do. You know, Stephen gets on his knees. He gives this to the Lord. There's no accident that verse 58 is in your Bible of Acts chapter 7. They cast him out of the city. They stoned him. And notice what happened. As they went out and the witnesses laid down their clothes, they took off their suit coats because this is going to get real. They took off those outer garments and they laid them at the feet of a young man named who? Saul. A future leader of the church. Was it 14 out of your 27 books in the New Testament written by this man? One who's going to go and follow the steps of these men, killing Christians for a while. But one who is going to watch a Stephen get on his knees and say, God, hold this not to their charge. He's going to watch in action an agape love like he has never seen before, that eventually is going to lead him to Christ and eventually going to cause him to become the greatest person, I would say, for the church that ever walked the face of the earth other than Jesus Christ. So, what is the vindication? Is it the end of our text where it says, great is your reward? I'm going to argue that the greatest reward that we have for this type of love that Jesus shows us is God transforming a life because of it. God looking through the eyes of a Stephen. God in his grace, I think you say, well, how can I not strike back? I think it's grace. God gives Stephen grace, and I don't think Stephen was actually even killed here. I think God took Stephen's life from him before he endured everything he needed to endure by grace. And by grace, God allowing this to happen uses this event and this example of agape love to change the life of a man who will change the life of the church. And we are reaping the benefits of that even today. You have no idea, church. We have no idea how God is going to use agape love, even in your family, even in your workplace, in your community. Some of you maybe have already seen that. It's not easy, and I'm not standing here saying it's easy. But as Jesus said, for those of you who hear, let you hear. And for those of you that are sitting out there this morning who are actually listening, if you heard nothing else on this sermon, listen to this. Love your enemies. A sacrificial, Christ-like, agape love. And great will be your reward in heaven. Father God, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's why love is not an emotion, it's a will. And God, I pray that you will allow us to volitionally, willfully have a true desire to love the unlovely. Father, we love you.